From those surveys, we gathered about 2,100 responses, folks who filled out that survey, and began to get an idea of hunters' opinions and attitudes towards the current big game season structure and any changes they would like to see. So that lasted most of last year, that process, and then has led into a series of public outreach events, online comment forums, and now these current public meetings that have been ongoing throughout the state. I can't remember exactly how many public meetings we've held now across the state. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 20. And then we've had a couple virtual options as well for folks who couldn't attend in person. We've now completed all of our public meetings across the state related to big game season structure. We had 4 in-person events here in the Southwest region, one in Durango, one in Montrose, one in Monte Vista, and one in Gunnison. We also had a virtual option, or a couple virtual options that folks could attend as well. So we're kind of currently in that process, going through those public meetings or just ending that public meeting process. That will lead to a summary. I think statewide we had about 300 or a little over 300 in-person participants attend those public meetings. That will go into a summary of public outreach from both the public meetings as well as the big game attitude survey and the online comments that were received. This will go into a summary that will be presented to the Parks and Wildlife Commission at the August commission meeting. So they will get the summary of all of the input that was collected through that. And that will lead into development of big game season structure recommendations next spring, and then heading into Parks and Wildlife Commission deliberation and approval of the next big game season structure next summer sometime. And at that point, we'll have the season structure in place beginning in 2025. So these slides aren't anything real fancy, but just wanted to give a little bit of an overview, summary of what the turnout was like and what the input was that we received from the Southwest region in-person meetings. We had a meeting in Durango on May 22nd with 15 participants showing up. Meeting in Montrose on June 12th with 14 participants. Monte Vista June 15th with 14 participants, and then in Gunnison on June 22nd with 12 participants. So not huge turnouts, but really appreciate the efforts and the time of the folks who did attend these meetings and provide their input. A lot of passionate folks and a lot of good discussions, and really appreciate the input that we received. A lot of the discussion and polling and questions related to over-the-counter elk hunting and potential for limitations related to both archery and rifle for over-the-counter elk licenses. This is just a brief summary. In general, there seems to be wide support for limitation of over-the-counter elk licenses in the Southwest region, both for archery and rifle licenses. These are just essentially majority opinions that I have up here. If folks want to see actual percentages, I can provide those, but this is just sort of the majority opinion. These, opinions, the percentages might have ranged from 60% to 90%, somewhere in there, but majority opinion was that there's wide support at all 4 public meetings for limitations to both archery and rifle licenses. We also had an internal Southwest region staff poll in which there was large support for limiting archery, less support for limiting over-the-counter rifle licenses, about a 50-50 split. for limiting rifle licenses, but similar widespread support for limiting archery among Southwest region CPW staff. But hunters across the region seem to support elk limitations. We asked a question related to whether folks would prefer, whether hunters would prefer to do a straight limitation through the draw, similar to how we currently run the deer draw, our license allocation for deer hunting, versus an over-the-counter with caps system where a certain set number of licenses would be allocated. Those would be available on a first come, first serve over-the-counter allocation until they run out, essentially. The majority opinion across the region at all 4 public meetings was to allocate licenses through a limited draw, similar to how we currently run our deer system. In terms of limit, we also asked a question about whether hunters would prefer to go fully limited for both residents and non-residents, or if they would prefer to limit non-residents only and still have an over-the-counter option for residents. Not surprisingly, since it's mostly residents who were attending these in-person meetings, there was a lot of support for only limiting non-resident licenses. At the Gunnison meeting, there was support, majority opinion support for limiting both resident and non-resident hunters. At the other 3 meetings, the majority opinion was to limit non-residents only and maintain some over-the-counter hunting opportunity for residents. Again, that's probably not surprising given that the folks showing up at these public meetings are residents, and we're maybe not surprised that residents are going to choose an option that probably favors them over non-residents. When this question was asked amongst Southwest region staff, there was 76% support within CPW staff in the Southwest region for limiting both residents and non-residents, similar to how we currently limit deer licenses. Some other questions and discussions that were had at these public big game season structure meetings. There was a question asking hunters if they would support having optional deer licenses in the first rifle season. So as most of you are aware, the first rifle season is currently elk only. It's considered kind of a high quality opportunity for elk hunting. We only have elk licenses available during the first general rifle season. So we asked a question, would you support having the option of having deer licenses available during the first rifle season? Majority support for that option was only in Gunnison. Of the 4 public meetings, there was less support for it in Durango, Montrose, Monte Vista. Interestingly, when the question was asked amongst Southwest region staff, there was broader support for having the option of first rifle deer licenses, about a 66 to 34% split in support amongst staff. But at the public meetings, Gunnison was the only one where the majority opinion was to have that option of first rifle deer licenses. There's also been discussion of adding a second rifle pronghorn season. I think this is largely coming from the Eastern Plains and the eastern part of the state, but some desire to add a second rifle pronghorn season, as we only currently have one. This was pretty widely supported across the Southwest region. Probably doesn't impact the Southwest region a whole lot, but folks generally seem to think it was a good idea. And then the question about, there's been some discussion about leaving OTC, over-the-counter archery licenses available for private land only, and having that option where OTC licenses would still be valid, but only on private lands, and archery otherwise would be limited across the DAU. This was only supported by the majority in Montrose. The other 3 areas preferred to go fully limited and not have that OTC private land only option for archery. So that's just kind of a brief summary of the process that we're currently in related to big game season structure, and some of the input that we've received from throughout the Southwest region during our public meetings. And I guess with that, I would open it up to any questions that Mia or Roger might have, or anything else that that Brandon or Jonathan or any other Southwest region staff would like to add.
I can jump in really just quickly just to mention something. And hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Boydston. I'm a public involvement specialist. I'm based out of Denver, and I've been working on the big game season structure, public engagement, and the public meetings that we've been having. And earlier on in Jamin's presentation, there was a slide and a graphic about the timeline, and there's been kind of one addition. And since then that we didn't get a chance to make for the presentation that we gave to the public, which is that during phase, what's on there is phase 3 right now. We also have, you'll see phase 2, Sportspersons Caucuses and Sportspersons Roundtable. So we're also right now obviously talking about big game season structure right now during the Southwest Sportspersons Caucus, during the other Sportspersons Caucuses as well. And then we also have a Sportspersons Roundtable meeting, a statewide roundtable meeting where delegates from the caucuses and other statewide members get a chance to share feedback that they heard at the caucuses and feedback from their networks as well. And so I just wanted to say that at the Sportspersons Roundtable meeting that we have in about a week and a half is actually going to be kind of the last step in this phase in which we'll report to the commission. So what we hear tonight from the caucuses and at the roundtable meeting in about a week and a half, that will be included in the public involvement, the public engagement summary that gets sent to the commission that they read when thinking about possible changes, and also shared with CPW leadership as well when they're thinking about possible changes as well. So your voices tonight are being heard. I just wanted to mention that, even though it wasn't necessarily indicated on this graphic, which is my fault, Jake. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Hey, Jamin, I had one question, or maybe this is for Jonathan. I don't know, but hearing from some of the public, what's some of the other options that we have for the public to comment as we have these meetings, as we have the caucus meetings, and then they have time to noodle on this a little bit? What options do they have to comment either now or into the future through the process?
Yeah, sure. I can take that. So for right now, like we mentioned, we're kind of at the final end of this phase in the public involvement process, but there will be the chance for the public to comment on big game season structure, because we're not even yet at the point that we have any staff recommendations. And so when what will be presented to the commission at their August meeting is a report on public involvement in big game season structure, or big game season structure. So at that meeting, the commission will get a chance to discuss big game season structure, and at future meetings, the commission will get a chance to discuss it as well. And they are the ones who will ultimately adopt any changes. And so I would encourage the public, and I know many of you attending tonight already do listen in on commission meetings and submit comments, but please do submit written comments to the commission. I can drop the email address in the chat here momentarily. I need to pull it up. So send an email to the commission about big game season structure. And then we might also roll out some other opportunities to submit comments through that Engage CPW page on big game season structure as well. And so you can kind of go there to learn more. I'll drop a link to the Engage CPW page in the chat as well. Thanks.
I have some comments. I can go whenever, if no one else jumps in, or whenever. Brandon? John, Roger has some comments that he'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead, Roger. And then I know we've got a few questions from Steve in the Q&A after Roger goes. We can start addressing some of those public comments, but certainly want to open it up to our caucus reps at this time.
Well, first of all, it's not a shock to anybody that I'm going to be happy that I see support for limiting rifle and archery from the public. I think that is, I've supported that for a long time, so not a surprise to anyone here. But I think all the issues with big game season structure are interrelated. Preference points would be affected positively with point creep if everything was a draw. And I do think that CPW, using your experts, your regional or area biologists to set numbers, you could set tag numbers anywhere, wherever they need to be, based on a lot of local factors. I think that would also help. For example, this year with our weather changes in the Northwest and lowering tag numbers up there would be easier if that was done out of an area or regional office, as opposed to going to the commission to do that. I think a lot of residents would like to have OTC tags and still get a preference point. And that's probably one of the reasons why I would support residents being limited as well as non-residents. I think that the one thing that going draw to everything, I was a little disappointed, 48%, but that's not a bad number with staff being in support of a draw. I do know that LPP comes into the process, as does allocation. Allocation just got changed to 75-25, and maybe that needs to be adjusted going further. Once again, that's where everything is interrelated. But I would like to see CPW embrace the LPP program, because I think it's a really good program with landowners. Yes, it may need to be adjusted, but compared to other states, I think it's a really good program. And I don't think that should be a negative for going draw for archery and rifle statewide and kicking that program off. I think that over-the-counter private land only archery tags probably set up an enforcement issue and a problem with enforcement. So I think that needs to be out there as well. That's about it. That's what I had for comments on that. Welcome questions and public comment.
All right, thanks for that, Roger. I know we do have a few questions from folks joining us on the Zoom too. Not sure if everybody can see these, but Jamin, I can go ahead and just read these for the good of the group, and then we can chat about it, answering these with the staff. But Steve makes the comment that archery elk units that have been limited in the Southwest region since the last big game season structure averaged 67% draw rate for non-residents, and that unit 80 and 81 was 73% draw for non-residents this last year. It says, non-residents are dominating and pummeling residents. Does CPW see this as an issue? If so, what are we going to be doing to address it? And then I know you can see in here, there's a few other comments about some of the over-the-counter splits.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, John. I can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Corey. Go ahead.
I can tackle it a little bit, Jamin, and if you want to jump in, you can as well. Steve, I appreciate the question. And yeah, I've seen the same thing. Is it a concern? I don't know if I can technically call it a concern. The one thing we are unable to do as an agency is to choose how somebody utilizes the draw. So if you're putting in for a preference point first choice and then hoping to pick up a secondary tag, and I'm not trying to be rude or mean about it, but you're kind of taking the choice on whether or not there is going to be availability. And you're right. In some of those units like 80 and 81, the resident to non-resident ratio is much higher. I think pretty much what you're seeing though is an artifact of that we are limiting these units in the Southwest due to biological and or social issues. right along with what the commission asked us to do instead of statewide limitations. I think by doing that, what we're seeing is exactly what you're talking about today, is that folks are either moving to other areas, and it's exacerbating that problem that we see in some of those units, and that it's causing some of these localized issues like we would see in 80 and 81. I don't think we see it as big over here near Durango, but I'm sure that there is some of that going on over here. I think what you're talking about hopefully will be addressed through the big game season structure, and I would just ask that the public continue to bring up some of these issues during that process, so hopefully we can address those. So again, thanks for the question, Steve.
I wanted to say something on that issue there also, that when we went to the commission as sportsmen, and I went on behalf of SCI, but we asked for this area here to be limited because there was so much overcrowding that it seemed like no archery hunters were happy. So it has helped us in the area a lot, and it's kind of helped the animals have a chance also. They're kind of rutting like they used to. So I personally have seen that impact over here in the area since it's been limited.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks, Corey. The only thing I wanted to add to you all's comments is just that, our current license allocation has resident preference, but that resident preference only applies to the first choice hunt codes. So currently we have a 65-35 resident, non-resident split, a resident preference of 65% of the license. That will switch, as you all mentioned, to 75% allocation for residents next year. But that resident preference only applies if you apply first choice. So, what we're seeing, and Steve knows this, but what we're seeing is there's just, in some of these units, there's a lack of resident applications for first choice. And so if you're a resident hunter and you want to get that resident preference, that 75-25 resident preference, then you need to apply first choice, because if you don't apply first choice, and if that first choice demand isn't there from residents, then those licenses can default to anybody. So if you want to draw a license as a resident, put in first choice. I guess that's the take home.
Are you still? Is the mic still on here? I think so. John, I would like to say something in regards to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Roger.
Jamin, I think you're absolutely right in that regard. I think a lot of people are holding maybe 10 preference points, and they don't want to burn that on a first choice. The other part of it is there's, and we're going to talk about Grand Mesa here shortly, but in the unit 521, where there was 1,000 tags, there was 300 left over. So, you could there's still a viable way to get a preference point and come backdooring into those units. At this point, I don't know what the status is in 80-81, and Corey or Mia, maybe you could address that, or Rick, with what's gone on after you're on second or third year, going into the third year for that, I believe. What happened on the second year down there for leftovers, I guess, and how that worked?
I can touch on it real quick, since it's, and I appreciate Steve sending part of this question ahead of time to where I could look at 80 and 81, and I know Rick could answer it as well. But so out of the public meetings that we had down in the valley, Roger, the public wanted to get back to more historic hunting numbers. So that how we got to the 2,000 tags was to go back in time, probably 8 or 10 years, and get back to those more historic levels of hunting in that area. And currently right now, I believe that draws out at second choice. So you don't have any leftover. To kind of get to Steve's point, and to touch on a little bit of Jamin's, because one of the things I've heard come up in some of these meetings is that we could do resident preference through second choice, and we could, if that would be the main desire of the public, and the commission would approve that. There's a lot that could happen, and not necessarily that I'm asking for that, but even if it went through second choice, the majority would have been drawn out by non-residents, just because I think there was about 800 or so, 700 or 800 residents that put in for that through second choice, and well over 1,000 non-residents that put in through second choice. So it would have still been lopsided a little bit towards non-resident, just not as greatly as Steve has mentioned as it is under the current model.
And Corey, thanks for that. I think, and that exemplifies the point even further, that a resident could apply as a second choice and still get a preference point and draw a tag there.
You confused me on the second choice. I know you can apply first choice and get a preference point, and then put in second choice, and hopefully in some of those, I mean, even in that unit, some residents drew that. I think a couple hundred drew it as a second choice.
Yeah, and that's what I heard from you, was that it drew out at second choice. And I don't know if some didn't draw as a second choice, but it does open up the avenue to still draw for a preference point first choice and draw a second choice in one of those units and get a tag. It sounds like a fairly high percentage of that. I think that there's a lot of talk about allocations on second choice and or reissue license and or secondary draw, and using a point or preference points on using some of that as a way to address preference point creep as well, and potentially getting creative. And I know, we're not necessarily prepared to go down that road tonight, but it does make the point that you could still get a preference point and have a good chance of drawing that tag as a second choice.
Correct. Thanks for that, Roger.
All right. With that, I'm not sure if the group can see the chat we got from Aaron Jones. Just made a quick comment in there. Was going to give Jamin a chance to see if he can check it out. But for the good of the group, I'll just read it off. Aaron said, I would encourage steps to promote hunting opportunities on private lands. This could be done either by going to fully limited and allowing landowners to participate in the LPP program, or over-the-counter archery opportunities on private lands. This would help landowners manage elk issues on private lands, provide more hunting opportunities on private lands, and disperse elk off of private lands. Thanks for the comment, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I can start with that, and then Corey or anybody else, feel free to jump in. I think that's a good comment, Aaron. And OTC, PLO licenses, over-the-counter, private land only archery licenses are something that we've done pretty frequently, mostly in the Northwest region. It's a system that we also instituted on the Grand Mesa starting this year. So that's the current system that's in place on the Grand Mesa and in a number of other GMUs, primarily in the Northwest part of the state. And the reason we do that is to allow as much hunting opportunity on private lands as possible, put some hunting pressure on private lands, and try to keep elk on public lands. There are some law enforcement challenges related to that the AWMs and Corey can speak better to than I can. So there are some trade-offs, but I think that's a good comment, and certainly a system that we've used in different parts of the state.
Appreciate it, Jamin. And Brandon would have to correct me. I thought we did that in 521 as far as OTC PLO, but I would have to have him refresh my mind on that. And Aaron, you bring up a really good point, and I appreciate that. There is some nuance to OTC PLO, and one of those, and I would have to check the statutes, but typically the only time that LPP comes into play is when that species is totally limited. So I think we would have to look at some of that, but in the case that we had over-the-counter PLO, you really, I guess at that point, would not need LPP in that they would be available for the landowners to use. Outside of that, and yeah, in the past there has been some law enforcement issues with over-the-counter PLO. I could probably, it's easier for me to talk more about the Eastern Plains where 95% or better of the land out there is private, and often folks pick up these because they're over the counter and think that it's either easy to hunt or they could hunt anywhere, and that's not necessarily the case. So that is correct. There are some issues with, to be honest, anything we picked, but this is the time that it's good for us to have those discussions, and we kind of work through those and determine the best path for the next 5 years. So appreciate the conversation.
And I've just got one more question in our Q&A that I want to make sure we get to from Mark Schofield. He has the comment that youth preference in the leftover draw seems to be strongly favoring non-resident youth. Is that the goal of the youth preference, to benefit non-resident youth more? If not, what consideration could help resident youth benefit further in the leftover draw?
I think I understand the question, and again, Jamin or someone can jump in. I don't think it is intended to favor resident versus non-resident youth. It's intended to favor youth in general, which is the future of our hunting, whether that be a resident or the future non-residents that would hunt in this state. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but no, it's not geared to benefit one or the other.
You know what, Corey, one of the things on my list was kind of talking about that secondary draw, and understand that youth hunters are the future of our hunting. I think a lot of people are getting are questioning all four preferences going to youth, and potentially non-resident youth overriding a resident non-youth hunter on even a second or third or fourth choice. And I don't know what the answer is there, but there's I'm hearing a lot about that secondary draw, and it's really not even worth putting in because youth preference all through four preferences.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm trying to remember back in time when that was discussed on the commission floor, and it was, it's been years, Roger, and I know the commission was very supportive of it at that time. I think with limited resource and how folks can apply in the draw or pick up landowners or all that. Again, being in the 5-year season structure, hopefully Jamin and Brandon are listening to that, and they can bring it to the group, as that's one of the topics that are coming up within the Southwest region.
Yeah, and that's something I've heard as well, Roger. I think that's I don't know. I'd say I don't know if concern is the right word, but certainly something people are aware of is that the secondary draw is 100% youth preference, and that's great for our youth and the youth that are picking up those licenses, but oftentimes there's no licenses left over beyond that. There was kind of an interesting idea. I thought I was just going to throw this out there because it came up I can't remember what meeting, maybe our Montrose meeting, Rachel might remember, but there was a suggestion to go fully limited for elk, but leave OTC opportunities for youth. I thought that was an interesting suggestion and something to consider.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate the conversation. I know we got a few more comments from Steve and a few folks in the chat. I will say we can get back to some of those here toward the end if we have some time, but we're already running about 15 minutes late on the agenda, and know we got a few other topics we want to get to tonight. I know we've already kind of hinted on it a little bit, but if we want to transition now, I know Roger and Mia had some questions regarding some of the elk licenses issued on the Grand Mesa this year. So I don't, if Roger and Mia kind of want to present that question, and then our staff can go ahead and start diving into that topic.
Go ahead, Mia. You had it. It was in your email. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I think we have, we did, the PLO OTC was instituted in those units. I believe that there was 1,000 tags allocated for 521 for archery. And like I stated earlier, there was 300, I think 300 plus in the leftover. And Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, there was 1,000 through the rest of E14?
Or it was 2,000, I think, on the north side for 41, 42, and 421. So the Northwest region portion, I think it was 2,000 licenses or 1,000. It was 2,000. And then we have another hunt code that includes GMUs 52 and 411, and we issued 450 licenses. So on the south side, a total of 1,450 licenses between the three GMUs.
And I think there was significant leftovers in all those hunt codes.
Yes. Yeah. So I can dive into a few numbers if we want to, just as an interesting case study. Unless Mia, you have some specific questions you want to put on the table now or comments.
The specific question that we had was, how did we come up with that number of tags?
Okay, gotcha. So again, so the Grand Mesa, this was the first year that we went totally limited for archery. So this is the novel year. So during this license setting season, we got together with folks in our region and the Northwest region, since we managed the Grand Mesa together, and had long discussions on how to begin our allocations for this first year. I think, there were certainly reasons why we chose to limit the Grand Mesa. And everyone, I think, knew that there were license reductions coming. So going into this year, the question was, how significant are those license reductions going to be for the first year? And so what we did in the Southwest region, we have two hunt codes. We have the GMU 52 hunt code, which includes units 52 and 411. And then we have the 521 hunt code. So dealing with two different hunt codes. And what we did is we looked at the 3-year average number of over-the-counter archery participants in those two GMUs to sort of start our discussions. And at the end of the day, the 1,000 licenses we recommended in 521 was about a 30% reduction from the 3-year average. 450 licenses in the 52 hunt code was about a 20% license reduction. And there is potential that in subsequent future years here, we will recommend additional license reductions in the spirit of the issue paper that we presented. This year, we didn't want to go too far to shock the system too much in our area, which 30% is probably going to do anyway. But we wanted to make significant enough cuts to where it was felt during the hunting seasons. And again, sort of moving down the path of what the issue paper was intended to accomplish, which is lower hunter crowding, maybe influencing elk distribution and those types of factors. So I think that answers the question. Corey's correct. We've talked about it a bunch now. Over-the-counter licenses are still valid for either sex archery on private lands across the Grand Mesa, as would be the over-the-counter antlerless archery license that's still valid on some of the game management units up there. So that was we're using the Northwest model. We adopted that for the Grand Mesa. This year will be a really interesting year on how that works. And we probably will have more to report next year on potential law enforcement issues and challenges and those sorts of things. So we're in a whole new era. You know, the only other comment I would make based on the previous conversation, I think, you know, when we start talking about limitations and how allocation is actually playing out in these limited units, I think it's important to keep in mind, you know, what is the intent of limitations? And, you know, I think different people have different interests in how limitations play out, how they're applied. You know, if our intent is to influence the preference point system, as an example, for those highly coveted units that we talk so much about with preference point creep, you know, there's that conversation. If we're talking about, you know, who gets the licenses by the time the hunting seasons start, you know, so much of that just comes to supply and demand allocation. And, you know, on the Grand Mesa right now, if you're a resident and you want to go hunting for elk during the archery season, you can certainly do that. So again, all of these conversations are related. And I think when we start talking about limitations, and whether it's total limitations, resident limitations, non-resident limitations, we have to keep in mind the more global conversations that are happening with preference points, allocation, all those kinds of things, because they're all related. So just a point I wanted to follow up on.
I think it'll be real interesting to see how it plays out this year through the rest of the draw process with leftovers, reissues, what crowding is like at those numbers. Essentially, 521 had doubled in 8 years. So, you know, 8 years ago, we were at 750 archery tags, and then we went to 1,500. Now we're back to 1,000. I mean, I think potential for further decreases would be out there, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes this year. And Corey, you mentioned that with 8081, that it was back to, you know, some of those historical numbers. So I think the 1,000 tags in 521 was, you know, if it was an average of the 3 years, it was probably, you know, we probably hit 1,000 at 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, thanks for that, Roger. And it's very similar to what we did here locally around Durango. It's taken us about 3 years of looking what's happening on the ground to get to the current numbers that we're at, again, in and around these units around Durango. I think they've ratcheted back each year. And I think right now here locally, they're really trying to meet demand through about second choice. And that's being well received by locals and others that we're checking out there in the field. So I think it's working. I think getting to what Mia was talking about, you know, starting to see that rut action, starting to see a few more calves on the ground and make it, you know, through without being harassed as much. I think we're starting to see some of those benefits of the limitations. So, yeah, we'll continue to monitor it.
All right. For the interest of time and getting back on track here, we'll go ahead and move to the next topic. But I wanted to real quick acknowledge our audience that's watching on our YouTube live stream and appreciate the comments that are coming in there as well. And hopefully, yeah, we'll have some more time at the end to raise up a few more of these questions that we're getting and go from there. I know our next topic on the agenda, we've also kind of hit on a little bit this evening, but I know there was interest in a conversation regarding some potential, you know, look at more over-the-counter archery licenses, I believe, on private land. And looking at that, if one of our caucus reps wanted to kind of bring up that topic, we have a couple minutes here where we could chat about that.
Yeah, it seems like we've kind of went over that somewhat. I guess one of my questions, and I was going to ask Brandon during a break, but I'll ask it so everybody can hear it as well. I guess that OTC archery private land only cow is a B tag. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And the either sex an A tag.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we pretty much covered it. And I think Aaron's question in the chat kind of brought that to topic, but I think we covered everything that we had on that topic.
Excellent. Well, very good. Then we can move right along and kind of jump forward back onto our agenda here. I know we were looking at chatting with our energy liaison, Brian McGee, a little bit this evening, just talking about impacts to wildlife habitat with renewable energy, as well as the continued thing that we see with increased recreation and impacts on wildlife populations. So I want to thank Brian for joining us from the road today. And yeah, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian McGee. I'm the energy liaison for the Southwest region. I've been working on energy and land use issues for about 14 years for CPW. And so I think we'll cover just a little bit tonight about some of the, the overview of one, what we do in terms of land use and energy, what our role is, and then we can talk a little bit about some specific stuff with renewables and recreation if we want. And we can talk about a whole bunch of other project-specific stuff that's going on. So, I have cover the whole southwest quadrant of the state. I have counterparts in each of the other regions across the state. We also have land use coordinators. Right now, there's 9 total CPW staff that are solely work on land use and energy issues. We are about to get up. We have 3 unfilled positions. So when we're totally staffed up, we'll have about 12 of us working on these energy and land use throughout the state. We're our team, our team is focused primarily on working with regulatory agencies to address wildlife issues associated with development. And many of you likely know, but CPW doesn't have any regulatory authority when it comes to regulating land use. And so we have to work with federal land management agencies, other state agencies, local governments to provide input on development to benefit wildlife and to conserve wildlife. And so we routinely work with the BLM and the Forest Service through their NEPA projects, but we also spend a lot of time with counties and counties who have their local land use authority stuff. So I guess in terms of the regulatory role, like I said, we don't have a regulatory role except for we have a little bit of a special relationship with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So we have a little bit more of a heightened advisory role in their process. But our sort of framework around energy and land use issues is the entire mitigation hierarchy concept of avoid, minimize, and mitigate. And so we spend a lot of our time, looking at individual projects, working with project proponents, whether they're a trails group or whether it's a renewable energy company or oil and gas company, on site-specific development impacts, and then ways that making recommendations on avoiding the impact, minimizing the impact, and then mitigating the impact. In terms of renewable energy stuff, Colorado has a goal of being 100% renewable by 2040. And so like many of you know, there's a huge emphasis on putting renewable energy on the ground. And renewable energy, definitely has impacts to wildlife. And we're working, with developers, primarily with developers, and counties on how to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those. Most of solar and wind in Colorado are just regulated through the county process, and so there's no state siting board or anything like that. So that's really where that game is played. Is what can counties do to require companies to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. We also work very proactively with companies, especially from their initial contacts with us when they're looking at sites and doing site-specific reviews of what we think that the wildlife impacts might be. And we spend a lot of time doing that, of just doing some initial project screening and project evaluation with developers. What else do we want to talk about? That I guess in like the last 3 years or so in the Southwest region, we've had about 20,000 acres of solar proposals. That's not development, but that's just project areas that we've looked at and sort of had some initial discussions with operators on those sites. Only one, well, there's been some small ones that have actually successfully been permitted. There's only one relatively large one that's about 1,500 acres that was permitted last year by Dolores County. But we've had proposals in Gunnison sage-grouse habitat, a lot of proposals in deer and elk habitat, and we're always sort of trying to, work with those developers to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. We work a lot in the recreation front. We work a lot with the BLM and Forest Service because they get primarily the bulk of the recreation proposals, and we work through their NEPA process. Again, to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. And we also end up working directly with trail proponents through our trails program and our trail grant project, our trail grant program as well. There's a lot going on in terms of BLM planning world right now, and so some of you are aware, but we are participating as a cooperating agency on numerous programmatic statewide scale BLM processes, including the Big Game RMPA, which is ongoing, the Gunnison Sage-Grouse Resource Management Plan Amendment. We're a cooperating agency on the national, or it's west-wide programmatic solar environmental impact statement and resource management plan update. The BLM has been just issued a proposal for a conservation rule that would basically elevate conservation as a use under FLTMA that we commented on. And BLM just issued another proposal of a new renewable energy rule. So there's a lot going on in terms of the BLM right now and certainly planning. And I think with that, I'll just turn it over to any questions if folks have them.
Hey, Brian, appreciate it. One, I want to say thanks to Brian and not only our team here locally, but statewide. Y'all are largely behind the curtain as it relates to the public. So we often get that ask of if we're paying attention, and I can't say enough about Brian and that team and how much they do for wildlife in the state. I mean, they're truly some unsung heroes, and I appreciate that. Real quick to one thing that Brian brought up, and that's the BLM conservation rule and possible effects. To be honest, we're still trying to understand that and ask questions to the BLM on what the intent of this ruling would be. I know generally right off the top, when a lot of folks read it within the agency, it looked to be like there could be potential impacts to impact hunting. Currently, right now, we're being told that is not the case, but it's something we'll definitely continue to look at as this process moves forward. I know a lot of other states are also weighing in and have similar concerns. So again, all I can say is we'll continue to try to address all of our concerns and your concerns as we roll through that process. So.
And I have a question in regard to that, and Corey, you can answer it, or Brian. I know that it's public knowledge, we can go look it up, but can you give us a summary of what you said that CPW made comment in regard to the rule? Can you give us a summary of what the comment was?
Yeah, for sure. So we submitted a joint comment with DNR. Our letter was signed by DNR Director Gibbs, but we were the primary authors of those comments. And I think overall the concept is a good one in terms of putting as an allocation decision, sort of thinking about elevating the conservation as a resource through resource land management planning. The big sticky wicket that's new for everyone is this concept of conservation leasing, and so the bulk of our comments sort of focused on trying to tease out, okay, well, what is this conservation leasing concept? What does it mean? And then in particular, making sure that conservation lease, wouldn't preclude what the BLM is terming as casual use. And what we specifically asked them to address is we want you to define lawful hunting and fishing activities and other, dispersed recreation activities as permissible under this sort of concept of a conservation lease. But I think the BLM's got a tough road to hoe in terms of getting a lot of stakeholders and states on board with this concept because it's so new. But we're engaged in it. We supplied our comments. We will likely ask to be a cooperating agency if that thing moves forward. I guess we'll stay tuned and see what happens with that.
As being a member of the Sportsman's Caucus, since that's what we're here for, I think a primary issue that our groups have had is that hunting is part of conservation, so we don't understand why there has to be this separate word that says conservation that in our minds is going to turn into preservation.
So that's a good observation. I think in terms of if you look at it in terms of FLTMA, which is the Federal Land Management Policy Act, there's no tool in the toolbox to sort of say, there are areas, public land areas that we want to just say, you know what, we don't want to lease these for oil and gas. We don't want to do solar here. We don't want to do high intensity recreational developments. We kind of want to leave them as they are, and we want to conserve these intact landscapes. And so in terms of a wildlife conservation lens, I think that's spot on. I think we do need to make sure that the BLM and that other members of the public don't interpret conservation as a preservationist piece, because I don't think that's the intent of the BLM. But we definitely need to stay tuned and make sure that we're advocating for sports persons and hunting and fishing.
Brian, I have a question. Brian, I was just going to touch on a couple things. I mean, everything you said would be applicable to fossil fuel development as well. And our place, our family ranch is in the south end of the Piceance Basin. And I don't know if that would be in the Southwest region or the Northwest region, but it is in Game Management Unit 521. And you mentioned you have no regulatory authority. I was wondering how Senate Bill 181 changed that or helps that from your standpoint with counties. And also, are you able to provide input for closure, say for calving elk or migratory routes? And what is your input on those things with, say, are you getting more support from BLM or U.S. Forest Service on those things, and possibly in managing all these energy uses?
Yeah, so great question, Roger. So I did say at the beginning we have a little bit of a special role with the COGCC, and that is directly related to Senate Bill 181 and then the subsequent oil and gas rules that we help the commission promulgate, to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to wildlife. So we do have a little more intensive consultation role with the COGCC Commission on oil and gas development. That's probably our most formalized role in terms of looking at all the site-specific impacts and working with those operators and the COGCC Commission. So that's been a big change. Those regulations have been in place for a couple of years now, and from our viewpoint, they're working really well in terms of the conservation of wildlife. In terms of your other question about, are we getting traction with, and if I frame this wrong, just correct me, but with, BLM and Forest Service on migration corridors and elk production areas and winter range and stuff, I'd say we are. They have a multi-use mission, and so sometimes there's conflicts with other uses and wildlife use, and we try to work through those through their process. We focus our comments on what we term high priority habitats, which, from a big game standpoint, are those critical winter ranges, winter concentration areas, migration corridors, elk production areas. And so we're trying to almost high grade some of those really important habitats, and really focus our comments and getting good conservation outcomes working through those processes with the land managers. I think the some of the big game planning that the BLM is doing is going to hopefully sort of solidify that even more.
I think, before Senate Bill 181, CPW seemed to rarely have a voice in some of those things. So, and wildlife usually gets a short end of the stick. So it's good to see wildlife being a plank in that bill. And hopefully you guys are able to participate or help in the decision-making more than previously.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case, Roger.
Thank you.
All right. Unless we have any more questions or comments from our caucus reps, I'm not seeing anything coming in on the chat. So I think we can go ahead and move on. Brian, appreciate you hopping on. If you're going to stick around or not for the little bit of roundtable, but yeah, just want to thank you for making time tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so for the rest of the meeting that we have tonight, we've got about 45 minutes or so. Wanted to open it up. I know Mia and Roger had sent a few more questions and topics just to kind of roundtable discuss with staff. Mia, we'll go ahead and start with you if you have a few of the items that we haven't addressed already on the agenda tonight, and we can just kind of open up a more roundtable type discussion here.
Yeah, there was one question that I had that we haven't covered yet. And I know we did talk about it last winter when we had a blizzard and nobody was able to attend. But I had a gentleman reach out to me and he wanted to know more about a fisheries report and how to make more gold medal waters, and then also discuss bag limits and possibly changing them so people aren't taking so many fish out of the river.
Sure, and I'll turn it over to Corey, because I know unfortunately our senior aquatic biologist John Alves is out currently, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Corey first, and then see where we can kind of take it from there.
So I can touch on some of that, Mia. Some it might be great to go ahead and put a pin in a larger discussion later in how typically statewide we would handle some of those issues, like the bag and possession limits. In the past, we have changed those. They used to be 8, they're now 4. And in some waters, it's less than that. There's some slot fishing statewide. So there's a lot of different type of aquatic regulations out there. I think even one of the aquatic regulations that we're looking at right now, and you'll see that it's out and open for public comment, but we're curious what folks think about crayfish. So we are asking the public about that. And that's typically the process on how we handle some of those. Probably more often than not, they're handled locally. So if any of the AWMs or biologists within the areas saw or seen some issues, those would be handled more on a smaller case. It's I think we often see that within the state. What suits some don't suit all. So we typically handle those locally. When it comes to gold medal waters, again, I'll touch on that a little bit. There's regulations in place that guide the gold medal program. Typically, we monitor our waters every year, every couple of years, and within the gold medal regulations, there's standards that have to be met over time, continually. Probably the most recent change that we've seen is there on the Taylor and Gunnison up in Brandon's country, and the addition to reaches of those waters to put those into gold medal. Those have been gold medal for how many years, Brandon?
15.
Yeah.
Long time. Yeah.
So unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, there's things that come with status, and sometimes that's more fishing pressure. That's something the Southwest has probably struggled with, at least in that country, for quite a few years. We've worked through some of that and realized that every now and then it's okay to pat the resource on the back or pat herself on the back for good work done in the field, and we elevate some of those up to those higher standards. But again, back to your other, it's probably a lot of the issues that we typically see are more on a local nature. So it's kind of like, I mean, we can say the same thing with BGSS, and I tell you, it's one of the things I struggle with the most. And I think CPW can be better. I think we often ask too many questions. I think often we ought to ask, is there a problem? And then y'all pay us to try to fix that problem. And the nice thing about the BGSS process is we do that every 5 years. So I think a lot of times we get caught up in the weeds and in the minutia, and there is no way we are ever going to satisfy 100% of the folks out there. So again, I think sometimes we get in our own way in the questions that we ask, and we ought to just sometimes ask, is there a problem or not? But I know I was kind of bouncing around your question, but did I get it all?
I think so.
Okay.
And Mia, so just because we just went through this, Corey got most of it, but I pulled up the policy for him here. And just for folks that are listening and for your information, the standard for gold medal is 60 pounds of fish per acre and at least 12 trout 14 inches or longer per acre on a sustained basis. And the gold medal waters must be a minimum of 2 miles in length. That's another one. But yeah, it's based on pounds and the length of fish. So there are some, those bars that you have to achieve before it's even considered for that gold medal designation.
All right, and then if we have nothing else on that topic, we can keep sticking with you for a little bit, Mia, if you've got a few more for us.
Another question that we had was about the increased predator populations, and we know that we already have increased predator populations with the bears that we've been talking about for years, and then we're going to be having other predators added to it. And what the group wanted to know is, we do know that there is added staff for the wolf management, but as far as the bears and mountain lions, is that just going to kind of stay status quo, or do we have additional management plan being added into that?
John and I can touch on that. And Jamin, you might be able to jump in a little bit. as it relates to bears, but I'll try to hit as much as I can of it. The one that I'll start with is that Jamin and his folks, and actually terrestrial folks statewide, are currently working to upgrade all of our HMPs. That all of our big game species they're working on right now. So eventually they will get to bears. So I mean, I don't want to preface something that isn't true, but I mean, here just in the recent past, we went through, I will call a monumental process on getting the West Slope Lion Plan completed. I think that allows us as an agency much more flexibility in how we manage at least mountain lions. Does it necessarily mean we kill more or less mountain lions? I would say that's not necessarily the case, but it does allow us to manage lions differently and on a much larger scale than we used to be able to do that. So what was the other part of that question?
The other part of it is kind of, I believe, has to do with conflict and how's that going to be handled? Will there be?
Okay, gotcha. Our goal, and we've at least done the initial work or part of that process. It has not been approved, but at least yet. But instead of, I mean, we are building up the wolf side of it, but what we're hoping to get, I would say eventually statewide at more the local level, is instead of separating out species by species, so instead of there being a big game and a wolf, it would be more of a damage, I'll say damage manager, or game damage manager locally. I mean, currently we have Luke Hoffman statewide. And then of course our AWMs, DWMs locally have always been the first point of contact. It's getting to be a lot. I think you can hear that from local staff anywhere within the state, that it's the job's just becoming more and more. So we are trying to bolster up our full-time employees, and that's a new novel idea to more localize those to where we would have folks that could be specialists, that's their main job, and are more knowledgeable about techniques, what damage looks like, and I mean that's the majority of their job. So we are trying to expand that statewide eventually.
Okay. One other question, since the wolf kind of overlapped with that, and we didn't have wolf on the agenda, which amazes me. I don't know how that happened, but we have Gunnison on tonight, and since the wolves are going to be there, has Parks and Wildlife worked with the area residents there to talk about like the flattery and the techniques for that once it happens, once the wolves are dropped there?
So we have a meeting with Gunnison stock growers the day before the commission meeting, okay, to start that conversation and to be able to, I know the Gunnison stock growers have a lot of questions. Hopefully we have some answers to those. We're working through it at the same time they are. So hopefully we'll have good conversation and be able to get to some of that. Excuse me.
Yeah, and we've also, the Gunnison stock growers have been involved with the planning process the whole way. I think they attended every meeting. We had private conversations. We also had a good sort of educational back and forth with them ahead of the plan as it was developed, where Luke Hoffman was there, Matt Thorpe was there, I was there, and we gave some preliminary discussion, and certainly Luke talked about some of those mitigation techniques and conflict resolution techniques. So we're trying. I think we've had a pretty good first step on that, and probably going to continue as we move forward.
And I think that goes to your other question as well, Mia, is that's part of what we're trying to do, because the DWMs are so busy, is that if we can get a few more folks on the ground to be able to just this be their primary job and be able to be more helpful to the public, I think it'll be a benefit to all of us.
Yeah.
So Corey, I have but one question. It was actually on my list of questions, but it seems relevant to what we're talking about here. And I'm curious if you guys are aware of some of these studies, Jamin, Corey, out of state, that have to do with wolf and lion conflicts, and how wolves are actually potentially even crashing some lion populations. And it was a study, I believe it was in Wyoming. And I don't have that in front of me exactly, but are you guys aware of some of that stuff that's going on?
There's another one in Idaho.
Maybe
I've vaguely heard about it, but sorry, I'll let Jamin. He's probably more knowledgeable on that.
Yeah, Roger, thanks for the question. I am, I guess, peripherally aware of those studies. I think there's been kind of conflicting studies done in Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming, some of them indicating that wolf populations can impact lion populations, which makes sense on some level. You would expect there might be some competition there between wolves and other predators such as lions. So there has been some evidence in certain study areas that wolves can impact lion populations, coyote populations, other predator populations. There's been, I think, other studies done that haven't necessarily found those same results. So I guess differing results based on different study areas. But yeah, we are aware of those studies, and some of that's discussed in the wolf management plan. And there'll be to that point, there'll be quite a lot of ongoing research related to wolves here in Colorado once wolves are on the ground. We recently hired Ellen Brandell as primarily a wolf researcher. We'll be conducting wolf research specifically here in Colorado. It'll certainly be a research priority throughout the state once wolves are on the ground, and we'll be monitoring a lot of those same impacts, both to other predator species, as well as ungulate populations, and et cetera. And then I guess I might just take that opportunity to, Roger and Mia, you're well aware of it at this point, but related to predator monitoring, we also do, as you know, have the the lion density monitoring that's rotating around the state, and that's part of the West Slope mountain lion plan. But we're monitoring lion densities on a rotational basis throughout the state. We just completed the second year of that density monitoring in the Gunnison Basin related to lion densities, and the primary purpose of that is to basically ground truth the lion densities that are in our West Slope lion plan, which are basically based off of a resource selection function, basically a model, a habitat model that predicts how many lions could be supported across the landscape. So we have this lion density monitoring where we're actually collaring cats, radio collaring cats, marking them, and then getting them on camera to get on the ground density estimates. So that's rotating around the state, and that's also helping with our predator population monitoring as well.
Thank you, Jamin, for that.
All right, yeah. If nobody has any more questions or comments on that, Mia, I want to check, see if you have anything else you wanted to roundtable with the staff, or if we want to open it up to Roger, or just open it up to both of you at this time.
That's the only stuff that I had for as far as roundtable conversation. If we have, will we have time for any closing comments or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we will.
Okay. Then I'm good for now.
John, most everything that I had on my list has been addressed. There was only one other thing that I wanted to potentially ask about, and I talked with our DWM, Andrew Taylor, a couple of days ago in regards to a cutthroat restoration in kind of in the Thompson Divide area on some of those streams up there. And he was telling me that there was some grant money and that was going to start this year. I'm curious about that. I know it's been ongoing for looking at that for 2 or 3 years, trying to get that started.
So I can get you those details, Roger. Eric Garduno is probably leading that effort. And so if the work is happening this year, the fisheries crews are probably gearing up for it. So we can circle back on that. But that has been a project that's been in the works for a couple of years now. Yeah. Which will probably start with a road known project where they clean the stream out, and then we'll restock with cuts.
And those will be pure strain?
Yeah. I know Eric's been real active in cutthroat restoration projects. So Eric works partially for Area 16, but he lives in Rachel's office and does work in Area 18 as well.
Yeah, I've met Eric.
Yeah, gotcha.
So everything else of mine's been covered, John?
Very good. Thanks, Roger. Yeah, we can just open it up. I don't have any questions currently in our chats on YouTube, and think everything's been cleared up with the questions that we've taken here on the Zoom format. If folks who are attending have any more questions, we can keep an eye out for those. But yeah, Mia, if you had another statement or anything you'd like to say, we can go ahead and do that now while we're looking to see if anybody else has any more questions tonight.
Well, I meant to let Roger know before we started that I'm not going to be able to go to the statewide meeting because it's been changed a month earlier. And I actually have a hunter ed class that I'm teaching on that same day. So Roger is going to have to give that report. And I guess Aaron could probably help give the report up there if you guys are going. But while I'm talking about it, I had a question because I'm a volunteer. I'm pretty sure that Roger and Aaron are volunteers, but that meeting's all the way up in Breckenridge. And in the past, we've always had the meetings in Buena Vista or Salida. They've been kind of in the center of the state so that all the regions can kind of meet in the middle. And I'm just curious how we came up with Breckenridge. And for Roger and Aaron, if you're going, are you having to pay hotel fees? And is this something that is an issue with anyone else on the roundtable?
I haven't decided yet. I would say that July is just incredibly crazy and difficult. I do plan on attending that meeting at a minimum virtually, considering going myself, but I'll be happy to give the report either way. And I can circle back with you after this meeting and get your input on that.
And I don't know if Jonathan Boydston's still on, but he might be able to answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, I'm still here. So I heard a little bit about the question. Forgive me if I didn't catch every bit of it, but yeah, as far as the location, we have had some standard locations in the past for Sportspersons Roundtable. There's for a long while it was Buena Vista Salida, which we've had some recent meetings over there. Try to keep off of the I-70 corridor during the winter months to avoid ski traffic, basically. And then sometimes on the western slope, although that has included more like Grand Junction area, I want to say. So yeah, this meeting is going to be in Breckenridge, which we looked for locations that might work for our schedule during that weekend, and that being a central location for at least some people seems to work. But I will say, I would love to work with all of you in the Southwest delegates as well as staff to try to see if we can get a future roundtable meeting, the statewide roundtable, to be located in the Southwest. I know that would require some travel from folks, other regions, but I know that the Southwest delegates and statewide members certainly have to travel, and I get that that's a pain sometimes. So let's see if we can try to get something scheduled in the future in a convenient location for you all in the Southwest.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've ever specifically asked for one down here. In the past, we've always asked for it to be central so that somebody from up by Yuma isn't having to drive all the way down to Durango or something like that. If we have it in the middle of the state, it's just more convenient for everybody. And I would also say, let's not do it in a resort town that's super expensive if we're having to pay hotel fees.
Yeah, fair point. And we'll talk more with roundtable members about suggestions for locations for future meetings. Mia, I think that's a good idea to have that conversation and gauge kind of where people would like to travel to, because to your point, yeah, people have to kind of travel regardless. There's going to be some people that are going to have to travel, so we should optimally try to find a place that might work for them, and that might mean a place that's maybe not as central, but maybe has some cheaper lodging for people that do have to visit or have to stay the night. I mean, so good suggestion. Thank you.
And Mia, I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat from in there, but Aaron's will be attending and happy to help in any way, provided that comment. So just wanted to relay that to you as well.
Yeah, I really have to say that our region, Roger and Aaron, and they've always been super helpful and super involved. So it's really nice to have them involved on the caucus.
And I can reach out to Aaron as well and discuss with him also.
All right, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. We just had a comment from Mark, who missed the Southeast Region Caucus meeting last week and was happy to join us in the Southwest. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight. You're welcome to join the Southwest anytime. I'm glad we could give an update for you. But with that, unless anybody else has any last comments or anything, we can go ahead and shut it down for the evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Roger and Mia, both for attending and joining us and for all the great comments tonight. I think, Mia, are you raising your hand? Do you have one more?
I just wanted to say thanks. And I also wanted to let the viewers, if there's any still listening, let you guys know that we do have the Game Commission meeting coming up, and hopefully you guys can attend there and express thoughts that maybe if you didn't put them in the comments here, you can express them to the commission and let them know, especially about the big game season structure. That's something that we need to have those discussions so that everybody has their voice heard. I look forward to meeting Director Davis again, and hopefully we can talk about some archery hunting again, and seeing Deputy Director Dugan while I'm there, and Dallas May. I'm excited to congratulate him when I see him. So thank you, guys.
Very good, Mia. I want to thank everybody who's joined us. Again, you can engage with CPW at some of the links that we included in the chat, both on YouTube and on the Zoom, regarding the big game season structure, commenting, and how to leave comments for the commission as well. Again, thanks to all of our staff and our caucus reps, and we will look forward to having another one of these next January or early February, and meet with you all then. But yeah, thanks for everybody for joining the Southwest Region Sportspersons Caucus, and we will see you at the next one. Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you all.